Each country or economy must decide what their priorities are. And across the world, countries have these 7 goals they can choose from when they're looking at their economy. So we're going to break down these 7, and we're going to look at, for each of these, what is the goal? Where do we currently stand? How do we measure it? How do we achieve it? And what are some of the challenges that exist with trying to achieve the goal? So let's start first with improved standard of living. So when we talk about the improved standard of living, we're talking about the degree to which people have access to the goods and services that make their life better, easier, healthier, safer, more enjoyable. So when we talk about improved standard of living, we're talking about access to healthcare, to education, to a clean environment, to entertainment, culture, religion, and so on. So how do we measure whether or not our standard of living is improving? Well, we measure standard of living based on a gross national income per capita. And so we need to break this down into pieces. So let's start with the term national income. So national income is the money that we make selling our land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And so if you think back to our discussion earlier this semester, how do we pay for land? We pay for it with rent. How do we pay for labor? We pay for it with wages. Right? So land, labor, what were the other 2 factors of production? Land, labor, capital, and enterprise. All right, so how do we pay for capital then? What's its factor payment? Well, if you recall, it's interest. And how do we reward our entrepreneurs? We pay them profits. So when we talk about the national income, that's the money that people in Canada are making. So it's your wages, interest, rent, and profits. Now you'll notice here we have the term gross. So when we talk about gross national income, we're talking about the income of Canadians regardless of where they live. So for example, I'm a Texan. I'm from the US. So my income being paid by Red Deer College, so my wages, are not included in gross national income because I'm not a Canadian. Even though I live here in Canada, it's not included in gross national income. If you are a Canadian and you go work for a company, let's say in France, then your income, your wages, are included in gross national income because you are a Canadian, even though you are living abroad. So when we talk about gross national income, we're talking about the income of Canadians regardless of where they live. And because we can't define a word with the same word, we need to define income. And income is the wages, interest, rent, and profits. So gross national income is the wages, interest, rent, and profits of Canadians regardless of where they live. This tells us about the living standard of living for Canadians. And maybe some of that money that they're making is coming from outside of Canada. Now we look at it per capita. So per capita simply means per person. So we take the amount of money that you're earning, we divide it by the number of people, and that gives us a better indication of how each person within Canada is doing. So how do we improve the standard of living? Well, if we can increase your income, so wages, interest, rent, and profits, then we can increase your standard of living. The idea is that if you have more income, you can then buy better healthcare, buy better education, buy those goods and services that make your life better or more enjoyable. So we measure standard of living based on real income. Now, the reason it's real income is because we want to measure your ability to get more goods and services. And the word real just means that we take out inflation. Sometimes when you get a raise at work, that increase in your wages is simply a cost of living adjustment. That is, you're getting paid more because food, shelter, utilities are all costing you more. So that's an adjustment because of inflation. It doesn't mean that you can actually get more goods or services with your wages. So we want to look at real income. That is your buying power. What can you get? And we want to look at, can you get more goods and services? Because your standard of living should improve if your buying power, if you can get more goods and services, those goods and services that make your life better or more enjoyable. The challenge with this, though, is that it doesn't guarantee all citizens will be better off. Remember, it's per capita, so essentially it's an average. And so on average, are we better off? Now, some people may be way better off, some people less so, but we're looking at it on average. How are we doing? The other problem we have with looking at gross national income is it doesn't take into consideration what's happening with the environment or the crime rate. So, for example, our real income could be going up, our economy is booming, we're all working more, but that production of those goods and services could be increasing the amount of pollution. And so by looking simply at our earnings, wages, interest, rent, and profits, it doesn't necessarily tell us what's happening in terms of the environment or even what's happening in terms of crime. Well, let's take a look at where we currently stand. How are we doing? Well, you can see here on the left our real income over time. And you'll notice that our real income has been increasing. Okay. Right now, the average income in Canada is about $49,510. And in Alberta, so that was Canada, in Alberta, that number is about $59,592. Okay, so we can see how much on average we make. And you'll notice that in Alberta, we make higher on average than other parts of Canada. And our income has been increasing over time. Well, we want to take out inflation so we can do this time comparison. So, because things cost more today than they did 20 years ago. So in order to compare across time, we have to take out the inflation. We have to adjust. And so if you look at the Canadian real income, it is about $39,107 today. So you can see it's continuing to increase. If we want to compare to other countries, then we need to be in the same currency. And so what you see here on the right is what are called international dollars. So the idea here is that we're taking kind of a weighted average of multiple currencies. It's not a real currency itself, but it's a bundle of different currencies, a weighted average of them, so that we can compare. So if we take that $49,510 that the average Canadian earns, and we turn it into international dollars, then we're looking at $43,420. And you'll notice that it's less than in the US, where it's about 58 grand, but more than, say, the United Kingdom. And so you can see an example of some countries here. You can check out the link on Blackboard to the source of this and find the GNI per capita for other countries. There are other ways to measure the standard of living besides GNI per capita, and they are the Human Development Index, the poverty rate, and the education level. So what you see here on the right is the educational performance of 15-year-olds across countries. This is actually the PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. And in fact, if you live in Red Deer in 2009, you were a ninth grader back then your results are actually part of this study here. So you may have been a part of it. What we see here is a comparison between 2006 and 2012. And you can see that Canada has fallen. It's in the green here. That Canada has actually fallen over the years in terms of our math and reading performance. But we could rank the standard of living of countries based on the educational performance of our students. So then the question is, does educational performance depend on educational spending? So if we pay workers more, if we pay more for schools, will our students do better? Well, let's take a look at that. And so what you see here on these two graphs is that you see educational rankings, so how they performed, and you can see how much the country spends as a percentage of the total value of everything it produces, how much it spends on education. Okay. On the right, you can see scores of students versus the salary you pay faculty. And what's interesting is there doesn't seem to be a correlation between the amount countries spend or the amount they pay instructors in terms of performance. All right, so we had measures for standard of living. We have gross national income per capita. We have education. And we also have what is called the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index takes life expectancy, it takes that GNI per capita, and it takes the education of a country and combines it together into an index. And we see number 1 is Norway. United States comes in 4th place, Canada in 6th. And it's interesting because when you look at Canada and the US, you'll notice, for example, that Canada has a higher life expectancy than the US, but it has less income per person, which is why we are close on the Human Development Index. We can look at other countries in terms of how they are doing on that Human Development Index. Get my slides to show up here. Slides. All right, well, let's close this and open this back up so you can see it. What we're showing here is the countries that are most improved and least improved in terms of that Human Development Index. So we'll just open the slides back up again since it was having trouble. There we go. And so you can see countries that are most improved: Nepal, Mali, Bangladesh, China. And those that are least improved, so their standard of living has declined, would be Liberia, Congo, Zimbabwe, and so on.